Welcome back to the arena in the boardroom. I am Brandon, and I have a project that I've been working on for a little bit, tried to figure out how I wanted to roll it out, and the decision has been made. This is going to be a 5-part series that is going to outline the evaluation process and just kind of go in depth as to how I've evaluated, recruited, sourced, all those things in the past, how I believe it could be beneficial to implement this in an organization, how ultimately I would want to do it should I be running personnel for somebody in the future, which is my plan to at some point. So this is going to put all of that out there. There are some loose ties to what I've been researching, a little bit different because you have to scale it, and obviously with focusing on the NFL, none of us have those resources. So with something like this, this should be easy enough to follow, implement, and put into practice if it's something that you want to do to try to find the right people for your organization. Drink of the episode is eggnog, and I don't have a recipe and I do not have any suggestions. I'm going to turn it around and ask you for some suggestions because the current batch that I have needed heavy modifications to be delicious, and those are non-alcoholic modifications. I just had to add some spices and some flavorings to give it a little extra boost, but it shouldn't have to be like that. And I regret my decisions because the organic stuff was quite expensive. But moving on. So this series, a couple of things I would like to address. Recruitment as a whole, talent acquisition, personnel, human capital. This is not an entry-level pathway into human resources. And I've seen a couple of folks, whether it be social media groups, work boards, LinkedIn, where you've heard people say, well, if you just want to get into HR, start with recruiting. It's the easiest way to get in. That right there, you're setting your organization up for failure because you are now trusting somebody who might not be passionate about people, know how to elicit the right responses from people, or even they might even know how to interview properly. These are now the people who are bringing folks into your organization as assets, right? And if you have poor personnel selection in any medium, you are going to have struggles as an organization, inside of sports, outside of sports. So I would like to debunk that right here and just say that recruitment is not an entry-level position to anything. If you have entry-level recruiting spots and you're training somebody to rise through that particular realm, that is more than amenable. But if you're using recruitment as an organization to just get people in the door, you're setting yourselves up for failure, and you don't want to do that. The second thing, and I've seen this discussion a lot, and it stems with the process and the duration that it takes to get somebody through the channels to make a decision. The issues there stem from length, duration, and just not having a clean process of how you want to do things. There's a lot of mystery, and having been on the other side where I was looking for a job for a long time, there are a lot of really poor practices that are implemented by organizations that make the process a whole lot harder than it needs to be. There's a big difference, though, between having 4 interviews in 2 weeks and 4 interviews in 6 weeks. I personally don't believe the number of interviews is a problem as long as you're doing it within a condensed timeline. You can do 4 interviews in 2 weeks. It's very possible. And this process in particular is designed to be completed in 2 weeks or less per candidate once you get them through the system. If you're implementing these processes correctly, or you've got stability within your organization, the process shouldn't be an issue because you shouldn't have so many job openings that you need to make so many hires for that your process takes weeks and weeks alone. Even for some higher level positions, it shouldn't take 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks to get it done. Now, if you're talking maybe these C-suite positions or somebody who's in a high level operations role, I guess if it's drawn out, but also think about your structure and how you're able to narrow that down a little bit, right? There are qualified candidates out there, and you can really move this process through if you have a good process in place. All right, so when we look at this, we look at things in phases, right? I've got technically 4 phases, but 3 phases where you're actually interacting and engaging with your prospect or candidate. But starting with phase 0, that's going to be your information phase. Phase 1 is going to be your screening phase. Phase 2 is going to be your interview phase, and then phase 3 is where you make your final evaluations in the decision phase, where you decide whether or not you're going to hire somebody. So we're going to just in this initial episode, We're just going to broadly outline each phase, and then as we go through the week, another phase will be revealed, and that is how we are going to put this whole thing together. So we are going to start with phase 0, which is the informational phase. And you are going to spend varied amounts of time here. The information that you gather is really dependent on what information is available. So what are you looking for? If you've got a set parameter that you're searching for candidates, you're going to be looking at what candidates kind of fit that bill. If there's a candidate that you are interested in and they have a lot of different stuff, maybe they've got a LinkedIn, they've got a website, maybe they're doing something like this and they've got a podcast as well and they're talking about their expertise in a particular subject. It really just depends. You might only have a resume for somebody and you might have to start your evaluation based off of that. But the informational phase really is where you start to gather the information that might be relevant to you. And you have to go into this phase thinking that you might not ever leave this space. I say that because you might hit a couple of dead ends. You might look at somebody who in a vacuum could be, wow, this person looks like they could be a really suitable candidate for us, but at the end of the day, maybe there's just a couple of red flags or deal breakers that they might have or might not have that says, you know what, we might not want to pursue this further. And when you're in here, you don't have to make contact with somebody. You are just doing your due diligence. I mean, there's a lot of people looking for work. People have their information public. You at this point are just collecting information as to whether or not you would want to proceed. So you're starting with the identification of a prospect or a candidate. And then you do an initial assessment of their qualifications. Something that I would highly recommend is having a grading or a point system. A couple of government jobs I applied to in the past that I got an interview for a couple, but I didn't get an interview for some. And they sent an email telling me that they have this point system and I didn't meet the certain number of points. While I might have disagreed with their assessment of my qualifications, having that system in place at least is an easier pill to swallow as a candidate, because it's like, okay, well, they've got something that defines what they're looking for, and I just didn't meet it. So that goes back up to having a clean and clear process. So maybe you want to have that in place, whatever that looks like. If it's just a baseline set of qualifications, or if you want to have some other things, putting a grading system together will help you with that initial assessment as to whether or not you want to go and invite somebody into phase 1, which is your screen. And that's where you can be really creative as an organization with how you want to start that assessment. A couple things I did as a coach: personality tests, had them do some riddles. You try to set them up not for failure, but to just kind of measure intent and just kind of see where they're at in terms of thinking. This is where you can have a little fun and you can kind of throw out some metrics out there. I've interviewed with a lot of organizations that have had me take some sort of a personality test just to kind of see how they can best manage me, or how they could best work with me if they were going to be the one that I was going to move forward with. So collect information. It's good. And in saying that, the invite to phase 1, it doesn't mean that you are ending your informational phase. It just means you're transitioning them on. But you want to continue collecting information as it comes up, because facts change. Again, I've talked about this in the past. Social media. Somebody has all their stuff public, and as you're transitioning into the next phase of the interviews, you might see something, they might do something that could make you say, maybe we need to look at this a little bit further. If it's public, that means it's public for everybody, and you are well within your right to take a peek at it. You can do anything you want as an organization in your interview that's legal. Okay, make sure though that it's done with every candidate. That's going to be the caveat. Where you run into some not ethical problems, but legal problems is where your process, and this goes back to making sure you've got a very tight process, is selectively done on different candidates. If you're going to do it, you need that process to be as uniform as possible across the board so that nobody can ask any questions as to how you're doing it for certain people. If you're going to subject it to one, make sure you're subjecting it to all. All right, transitioning into phase 1, which is the screening phase. This is all going to be dependent on what you get in phase 0. Use the information that you have to set up that screen. You can scale the questions to maybe some of what you've seen. You can ask for more information. You can ask for clarifications, but you don't want to go into that screening phase with a specific agenda that is not tailored to that specific candidate. So that might clash a little bit with what I said about uniform practices, but how you do uniform practices is independent of how you interview somebody, right? So separate those two. But that screening itself should be to put a couple of things together from phase 0. And I say that to say that it is not an interview itself, it's a conversation when you're screening somebody. The genius tactic that I had somebody interview me with was they recorded the screening. So for that 30 minutes, she and I just had a very easy, direct conversation with one another, got to know each other a little bit outside of just what we would be doing with work. She explained a couple of things, and I outlined some of my qualifications. Like, you just kind of bounce off of each other. This is done to really establish that baseline assessment of viability. That's all the screening is. You shouldn't put too much into it, but you also shouldn't completely disregard some of the stuff that you get from it. A screen doesn't mean an interview, but again, just don't base too much off of the screening. You don't have to offer somebody an interview if the screening was poor, but also understand that that screen really is designed to just connect a couple of dots from what you've learned from phase 0, not necessarily interview for viability. You want to have some markers, but you also want to be willing to deviate from those markers because you're going to get some new data points that come in here, but stay engaged. So go back to that first piece where I said record the screening. You're going to get a lot of new information in here, and you want to be able to absorb and respond to it in real time by not taking notes with it. That was the other thing that happened. By recording the screening, you're going to be able to look at that after the fact to gain further insights. And you're going to be able to have a more organic conversation in that moment, which is going to help you evaluate this candidate as you go through the process. Okay, so we've gone through phase 0, phase 1. We're now in phase 2 if we're going to do this with the interview phase. And the screening allows for a tailored interview process. So again, avoid uniformity with the interviews and the candidates. Outside of ethics and compliance, you want to scale it to the candidate themselves. All right, so again, process, keep the process uniform. Ethically wise and for compliance reasons, you need that process uniform. But when you get into the actual interview, the information you have on each particular candidate, prospect, and person is going to be different, and you would be wise to scale what you talk about and how you interview to them. You want to make sure you get a clean process done. By that, you can do a couple of things. I love to, quote, give the answers to the test, right? Give them information, give them things to look at, and then when it comes time for the interview, discuss them. You're able to measure intent through preparation. And that's something I love to do because if they're not going to prepare for the interview, then how will they prepare for the day ins, day outs of the job? I mean, you can learn a lot through that simple process. Timeliness is key. Quantity is not, to a degree. So you want to think about how quickly you can get these interviews scheduled, not dragging them out, and really not worrying about the number unless it's an excessive number. I think the sweet spot for some of these positions is between 3 and 4. With you've got a screen, you've got an interview, maybe you've got an additional one right there for some upper level positions. But really, you could knock this process out really quick between 2 and 4 interviews. I'll say 2 and 4, not 3 and 4, but 2 and 4. 2 and 4 conversations, interviews, you should be able to knock this out, and that includes the screening as well. When you get to the interview phase, having a panel or more than one person participate is always a good idea because you can kind of bounce off of each other and use each other to do it. I would say have somebody from your TA, recruitment, or personnel department in there with the hiring manager because that way you can get some different information. Still, though, treat it like a conversation, not a press conference. Hit your markers, avoid a script, and use their answers to generate insights and additional questions. That is really how this whole thing should work. Schedule more time than needed. Don't schedule back-to-backs. Give all of the information to help that candidate make an informed decision. Definitely don't lie, and you have no reason to withhold because nowadays with people leaving jobs as quickly as they are, if they think you were dishonest in the process in any way, you are not going to keep them very long. So tell them everything about what they are going to be doing and about the organization, because if they can make an informed decision that way and they still want to be with you, you're onto something there. Don't be hesitant to provide information about benefits, philosophy of the organization. You can really open this whole thing up, and that can sometimes help you get better answers to some of these questions as well. You're really just trying to break down some of these walls so that you have a clean interview process. All right, that's really all it's going to come back to is the process. All right, so we're in the last one now, phase 3, which is the decision making. You want this to be difficult. A hard decision is not a problem. In fact, it's a really good problem to have. But this is going to be the true test of an evaluator. Discrimination versus discretion, we're going to talk about that when we do this episode, where a person fits or doesn't fit. I've got a specific example from the YMCA where I was interviewing for a bunch of positions, different times of the day, and I actually hired most of the people I interviewed just for different spots that they were in because I felt like they would fit better there, and they agreed. They felt like when I explained it to them that it would work out. So use your brain, critical thinking skills when you're assessing personnel, and we'll talk about that too. Ultimately, the decision is not going to be on the TA or personnel team. It's going to be on the manager. Your job is to give them the insights, give them information, and help them make a decision based off of the needs that they express to you. You're going to have to say no. Not every interview warrants a job, just like not every screening warrants an interview, just like not every person you source warrants a screen. You have to be discretionary here. Think about the employee too. They might have the qualifications for something. They could just be a really bad fit for it. And that goes back to that initial question of where do they fit, where do they not fit. You're going to have to do your best to remove yourself from the decision, bias, discrimination, likes, dislikes. Again, you're going to be really tested as an evaluator in phase 3 because it is going to be up to you to make the best decision for the organization, not the best decision in your head. All right. And then at the end, you don't have to give information as to why you didn't pick somebody. Feedback is always good, but you don't have to. You can just give a very short answer of moving forward. But think about, again, the process. If you're going to be that transparent with everything, giving somebody reasons, what they could improve on, what you were looking for specifically. Again, don't get yourself in trouble, right? You don't want to reveal information that could get you sued for discrimination, but giving somebody feedback as to the interview process, what they could do better next time, or just giving them compliments and saying it was a really tough decision. But don't leave them in a situation where it's just an automatic email and you just kind of wipe them out that way and just, sorry, we're just going with somebody else. You can do better than that if you're going to be transparent through this process. So that's going to be just kind of the overview, right? So we've got 20 minutes here about that just kind of goes into detail of what the next 4 episodes are going to look like. And that's where we're going to be. So Tuesday, we're going to talk in depth about phase 0, the informational phase, and what's going to be in there. What won't be included in any of this is just going to be kind of retention and internal personal assessments, which is a big part of personnel. That's going to be something completely separate. So we'll look forward to that down the road. We're hitting the end of November, and we're going to be heading into December and New Year. So there's going to be changes on this platform, and I'm excited for that. We're going to probably be switching up the name to create a little bit more of an inclusive space for those to participate and for those who want to engage with us. We've got that in the works, and we are going to be looking at some potential content changes as well. So just kind of floating that out there. As always, check out the other content. We've got writing on Medium, and we've got some additional podcasters as well over on Spotify. Follow us on LinkedIn at The Arena and the Boardroom for now. And when that changes, we will let you know. But as always, thanks for listening. Looking forward to sharing this throughout the week, and I will see you tomorrow on Tuesday.